can't see me, you Stevie. Wondering how I reach more evolutions than Eevee and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Ernie, Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, today's video, we're gonna be talking about X-Men Trial of Magneto #5 by Leah Williams and Lucas Wernick. And in this video, I'm gonna be breaking down the motivations behind the killer of Wanda Maximoff, as well as whether or not this story actually redeems Wanda Maximoff in the eyes of the mutants of Krakoa. We're gonna talk about all this and more right now, but first, if you wanna see more awesome videos like this one, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because I post multiple videos throughout the week, plus live stream the Blerd Cave every Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, and make sure you hit that bell button, that way you don't miss anything. Also, if you enjoy the video, Hulk smash that like button, because it really helps the channel out. That said, let's talk about X-Men Trial of Magneto #5. Okay, so one of the first things I want to go ahead and get out of the way, let's talk about the reveal of the killer of Wanda Maximoff. Now, early on in this comic, and it was even teased in the previous comic, that Wanda Maximoff knows exactly who it was that killed her. And all of the theories that we had, theories that it could have potentially been someone on the Quiet Council. There were even some weird fan theories about how it could have been her own brother Quicksilver who iced her, and there was all kinds of crazy shenanigans going into it. And honestly, while there is conspiracy, the person who actually physically killed Wanda Maximoff was in fact not Magneto, it was not Quicksilver, it wasn't Exodus, it wasn't Doctor Doom, it wasn't any other character who has not been present in the story or was present in the story except for one, and that is the mutant Toad. One of the first things I thought about when this was revealed is that Toad is a patsy. Toad is there to take the fall for this because there's some other larger force at work, and that kind of is the case, and it's kind of not. Yes, Toad is the one who pulled the trigger, or should I say rather, the one who actually pulled off the act of killing Wanda Maximoff. Something that we discover in this comic is going to be punished. This is a crime against other mutants, and of course it is decided that Toad must be exiled. Now, the real thing that I kind of want to get into here is why Toad did this. Toad did this, well, for one, he was asked to do so, and I'll get more into the motivations there, but the reasoning behind why he was asked to do it, or why at least he went along with this, is because Toad is all about the Brotherhood. This is something we actually bore witness to in the very first issue of X-Men Trial of Magneto, when the original Brotherhood of Evil Mutants were sitting at the Green Lagoon and lamenting over the demise of Wanda Maximoff. When you think about it, it all kind of makes sense. Toad had the strongest reaction of anyone who was sitting at that table. And mind you, Wanda Maximoff's own brother Quicksilver was sitting there. Now, of course, yes, he had a strong reaction as well to the death of Wanda Maximoff, and everyone poured a drink in honor of her, but Toad was the only one who seemed incredibly angry about it. And now we kind of know why. There's a point in this comic where Toad goes off about the fact that Wanda Maximoff used to be one of them, that she was once a member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and that she had betrayed them. But despite all of that, he did this because Magneto wanted him to. He doesn't say it in as many words, but we know that this is the case because Toad is very open about the fact that, yeah, I did it for the Brotherhood. I did this for Magneto.
I did it for
Magneto. Though to all the people sitting in the room, they just assume that, oh, it's because of his blind loyalty to a bygone era where Magneto was the leader of the Brotherhood. That's what all this is about. The Avengers are the ones who are kind of buying into this, and even the rest of the Quiet Council kind of seems to be buying into this whole thing. And of course, all the evidence is mounted against Toad. The Uru that we talked about in the previous issue of X-Men Trial of Magneto #4, we talked about this being a thing, that this was what was used. This mystic metal was used to kill Wanda Maximoff, and of course, as we now learn in this issue, Toad's fingerprints are all over it, so there you go. But it's not quite so simple of an open and shut case. Yes, Toad has been exiled, he's in the hole, he will very likely wind up in the upcoming Sabretooth series written by Victor Laval, because it is revealed in the solicits for that there are 5 other people who were put in the hole. We know 2 of them are Orphan Maker and Nanny, but Toad is one of those 5 mutants who have been exiled permanently, and there's going to be a story that, will, I guess, dive more into what's going on down there. But all that aside, the true culprit behind this, the mastermind behind the death of Wanda Maximoff, is actually Wanda Maximoff. Going back to Al Ewing's Sword number 6, we remember the meeting between Magneto and Wanda Maximoff and how it seemed like they had finally rekindled their familial relationship, that they decided that no, we are going to become family again, no matter what it takes. And we discover that apparently Magneto was not 100% on board for this plan that is going to basically get Wanda Maximoff back to him as family. Now, granted, that wasn't the reasoning why they were, colluding with one another. The reason why Wanda Maximoff was basically orchestrating her own demise is because she needed to become part of Krakoa, to become a part of the resurrection protocols, to become a part of the Krakoan system, thus, in a weird way, kind of making her a mutant again. Or at least in some roundabout way, some semblance of it. I don't think that Wanda Maximoff, per se, is a mutant once more, at least not in the strictest sense. That one is more up for debate than anything else. But basically, Wanda Maximoff used magic to manipulate the crime scene so that X-Factor would see pretty much what she wanted them to see, that they would see a murder, and not just a murder, but a crime of passion. Now, granted, going back to it, we do remember that they did say that there was a point in the investigation where they discovered that Wanda Maximoff's face had not been touched, and that was because it was apparently someone who cared about her, and even though Toad does feel like she betrayed them, well, yeah, he does still care about her. Toad has always kind of had a little bit of a crush on the Scarlet Witch, so that also kind of explains his feelings and the whole crime of passion thing, the whole works. But you're probably asking yourself, well, why did Wanda need to die? Well, number one, death is just a minor inconvenience for Wanda Maximoff. She didn't need the resurrection protocols to resurrect herself. This is something that I actually kind of thought about throughout this whole thing. Oh, Wanda Maximoff being dead, she could bring herself back if she wanted to. I mean, she has the power to do so. However, it was something that I was just kind of waiting to see how the story was going to play out. But yeah, she needed to die for whatever it was that she was trying to do to work. And that whatever it was thing is that she needed to make herself a part of the system so that she could affect the resurrection protocols. And the reason why Wanda wanted to do this, let's go back to Empire X-Men. In that miniseries that was a spinoff of the Empire event from 2020, Wanda tried desperately to undo all the deaths that took place on Genosha, and when she did so, she kind of inadvertently resurrected all of the, I believe it was 16 million some odd mutants that died during the Genosha massacre. Unfortunately, she resurrected them as Marvel zombies. Wanda has been trying desperately ever since that event to try and fix everything, to try and get back what was lost, and to try and redeem herself in the eyes of Krakoa and its mutants, because she's pretty much considered persona non grata. She's considered to be the most dangerous threat to all mutant kind because of the events of House of M. Her power alone was enough to nearly wipe out a species that was already decimated not that long prior. After the Genosha massacre, which I believe was about roughly 16 million mutants killed, that left roughly about, I think, a couple of thousands of mutants left in the world. And after the events of the decimation, or House of M, however you want to look at it, it left barely 200 mutants. And with those remaining 1,800 some odd mutants either losing their powers and even in some cases dying because they lost their powers. Wanda is undoing that by, once again, creating a mutant circus. She created something for herself called the Eldritch Orchard. She's actually going to take that concept, the very same concept where we saw her meeting her older self, the old woman Wanda version of herself in a part of the astral plane. She's going to give this gift to Krakoa. And this is actually a really big deal because this basically undoes a huge part of Krakoa, because the whole thing with the House of X era is that mutants can be resurrected. But now this changes things because they don't have to rely on Cerebro backups. They don't have to worry about backups being tainted or corrupted, as I believe was the case with Ten of Swords in regards to characters like Rockslide and Gorgon, and even the Hellions like Orphan Maker, Nanny, and Wildchild. But now what they can do is every mutant can voluntarily enter into what is now called the waiting room. room. This is all thanks to Wanda Maximoff bringing together people who are a part of the three pillars of Krakoa. She brings forth Polaris, also a daughter of Magneto, Legion, the son of Charles Xavier, and Proteus, the son of Moira McTaggart. Now, of course, in this instance, Wanda hasn't quite figured out that Moira is a major part of this. At least, rather, she knows she's a major part of this, but she doesn't really know why, and she's not aware of Moira McTaggart's existence, like as far as her being alive and being a mutant. For whatever reason, she does feel this kind of a connection to Proteus, and she kind of writes it off as though it's probably Proteus's connection to the astral plane. Now, if you're wondering why Proteus has this mysterious connection, this actually kind of ties him to Magneto in some ways, because this all took place, I believe it was back in X-Men Legacy, around the 230-31 mark of that particular series. But Magneto had altered Proteus's physiology using his electromagnetic abilities, because at the time, Proteus had possessed the body of Legion's girlfriend, Blindfold. And when Magneto altered Proteus's physiology, that is when Proteus drifted off into the astral plane, and the rest is history. That said, it's not Polaris who's able to complete the circuit the way that Wanda Maximoff wants, because there must be three people, so there must be three pillars. However, it's Wanda who actually takes the place of Polaris in this. Now, this is, once again, to make the spell work, but in a way, it's supposed to remind readers that, yes, Wanda Maximoff is now considered to be the daughter of Magneto once more, even if on a technicality level, she actually isn't anymore. But from a familial standpoint, from a bonding standpoint, she is now once again considered to be the daughter of Magneto. That is why all this is going on here. This is why all this panel time is linked to this particular aspect of it all, with Lorna even going as far as to say, yes, I consider you just as much a daughter of Magneto as I am, and we all know that Lorna is Magneto's kid. But yes, the waiting room. This is a way for mutants to come back. All the mutants who were not recorded by Cerebro, if any other mutant in existence was never recorded by Cerebro, this would allow them to be resurrected. This actually kind of takes us back to something we talked about in Jerry Duggan's Marauders, when Sebastian Shaw mused about wanting to resurrect his late wife, Lord Chantel, who we did later learn she was not dead. She was in fact faking her death, but the reason she couldn't be brought back is because her death predated Cerebro. At least it did in the previous canon before the retcon and Marauders. She couldn't be brought back because at that time when she died, Cerebro, as we know it now, had not yet been enacted. Therefore, since she predated Cerebro, she predated any potential for being resurrected. Now, of course, as I mentioned, she wasn't actually dead, so that doesn't count, but that was kind of the excuse that we were given since House of X for why certain mutants weren't around, because their death predated the creation of Cerebro by Forge and Xavier. This actually kind of brings us to probably one of the most long overdue resurrections since House of X began, and that is the resurrection of John Proudstar, aka Thunderbird, the brother of Warpath. John Proudstar has been dead for an unreasonable amount of time. We actually talked about this in my video for Jerry Duggan's X-Men #1. This was all in response to the X-Men renaming their classic jet as the Proudstar in honor of Thunderbird, and we talked about in that video how John Proudstar has been dead since X-Men #95 in 1975. He has appeared in some things here or there since then, but it's always been some kind of a weird resurrection or some alternate reality version or a spiritual version of Thunderbird, never Thunderbird proper, and now characters like Thunderbird can be resurrected. Another interesting aspect about this, in that all these mutants can be resurrected, it's not just some of the mutants that were missing, it can actually be any mutant. Humans that never got the opportunity to manifest their X gene, they can be brought back as well. We see this in the case of Northstar, who has basically kind of been carrying the torch for his adopted daughter Joanne. This is something that has gravely affected him, because one of Northstar's biggest deals has been dealing with loss, not just with Joanne, but even during the events of Age of X-Man, he kind of had to deal with loss in that series, in that event, and now he actually gets to have something back, and I think we're going to start seeing a more softer side of Northstar going forward, because now he gets to have his daughter back who died before she even got her X gene. As far as Northstar knew, he had some suspicions. Maybe she might be a mutant, or maybe she isn't. But now he knows for a fact that she is, because she does actually have an X gene, even though she was never backed up by Cerebro because of what Wanda Maximoff did, creating this waiting room in the astral plane. Mutants like Joanne can be brought back. Some of you may or may not remember Joanne, but this actually is a throwback to Alpha Flight back in 1992, Alpha Flight number 106. This was the first and only ever appearance of the character Joanne. She was an infant child that Northstar discovered during a battle between Alpha Flight and Mr. Hyde, and when he found this little girl, he took her to a hospital, and it was revealed that this little girl had AIDS. A lot of people tend to forget about this incident because honestly, people think that the whole, oh, Northstar's gay, this is something that is a recent development. No, this is something that goes all the way back to 1992. His interaction with the character Joanne, this child, and her being diagnosed with AIDS, it was something that galvanized him into coming out as a homosexual man himself. Now, there was a lot of fuss and a lot of muss about this entire debacle in this one singular issue of Alpha Flight, because unfortunately, Joanne's first appearance was her last appearance, as she died in this very same issue, as an infant, no less. And of course, her dying of AIDS made Jean-Paul decide to be more outspoken about his sexuality in the end, as I mentioned earlier, and of course, his intention was to raise awareness about AIDS, as well as educate people about the LGBTQ community at a time when, honestly, it was quite common to be incredibly hateful, dismissive, and downright violent towards people of the LGBTQ community. So yeah, her death had a profound effect on him as a character. Now I'm curious to see what effect her life will have on him going forward. Anyways, back to the whole waiting room deal. This allows Cerebro to not just back up current mutants, but it can back up any mutant. It can go into the past, it can go across the galaxy. It is literally stated by Hope Summers that it allows Cerebro to scan across time and space itself for every mutant who fell between the cracks of the resurrection protocols. Whether or not this would allow for characters who maybe don't exist in Earth 616 proper, that's hard to say. I think it could be a possibility, but not something I think will get addressed anytime terribly soon. However, I do think this could be a way to bring back characters who we haven't seen in a while, who technically exist in alternate realities. We could very easily see something like this occur, but once again, I'm not saying it's happening, I'm just saying it could happen. Another thing the waiting room serves a purpose as is that it gets rid of the Crucible. There is now an alternative for it. If you lost your powers, you don't necessarily have to go through the Crucible anymore. Like if you were a victim of House of M, you don't have to be killed anymore to get your powers back. You can willingly enter yourself into the resurrection protocols, and it doesn't require any kind of grandiose gesture or anything like that. All you have to do is just walk through the door. And here's the thing, this is not that crazy of a concept, considering that if we go back to the events of Way of X and its companion one-shot X-Men The Onslaught Revelation, we already know that Legion has already experimented with the astral plane regarding mutants, even setting up training grounds and learning centers and mental health practices within the astral plane for mutants. So it's not that big of a stretch that they can use the astral plane to resurrect as well. And it makes even more sense when we consider that Legion and Nightcrawler have already kicked off the Legionaries, which is basically a team meant to protect the astral plane and everything within it. So this is even more reason for the Legionaries to exist. Another thing that we learned in this is that Hope Summers is not exactly at fault for anything that she's done here. Everything that she's doing was technically orchestrated by the Scarlet Witch as well. She was brought in on the plan and told to resurrect Wanda Maximoff without informing the Quiet Council of anything. So even though Hope was acting incredibly weird, and it did seem like the Five were going into business for themselves, technically, I mean, they kind of were, but this was done all at the request of the Scarlet Witch because Hope understood that what Wanda wanted to do served a higher purpose. A purpose that transcended Wanda being persona non grata on Krakoa, her being deemed the pretender, or even the wishes of the Quiet Council for that matter. does this story redeem Wanda Maximoff? Yes, it does, in the eyes of Krakoa. The very last scenes that we see of this comic, we see Exodus, as we've seen him in previous issues of X-Men, where he's telling the children by the fireside this horror story about the pretender Wanda Maximoff. But in this case, he's not frowning. He's actually smiling because Wanda Maximoff has given mutant kind a gift that can never be taken away, and that is a magical connection to the astral plane that allows mutants to be resurrected, both past and present. And he seems to gladly recount the tale of how the pretender, as he says, became the redeemer, and even allows Wanda Maximoff to tell her own story. This is kind of a big deal because we must remember Exodus was one of her biggest detractors when it came to the idea of her. He was the one who spread most of the propaganda about her being the pretender, to the point that it almost felt like he was the one who coined the term for her. But now she is the redeemer. She has been redeemed in the eyes of all, and all mutants who have been lost can now come back. And yeah, this is basically everything Wanda has been building for over the last several years. This is long-term booking at its best because, yeah, we've actually witnessed, if you've kind of known where to look, we've seen her in the Star series, which was a spinoff from Captain Marvel. We've seen her in Empire X-Men. We've seen her across various and sundry other comics trying to undo what she did with House of M roughly around 2005, 2006. So this is something that's been in the making for about roughly 15 years. Now, the real question is, why was this called the trial of Magneto? There wasn't really a trial. I mean, yeah, there was at the very beginning, but it kind of seemed like it was a kangaroo court, and everybody just jumped to the conclusion that Magneto was the guilty party. This isn't a trial in the judiciary sense of the term. This is a trial in the existential sense of the word. The fact that Magneto had to kill the woman who he saw as his daughter, and even though he didn't directly do it, he played a major part in it, and this is something that has tempered him. It's one of those old sayings, as fire tempers steel, so hardship can temper the human soul. And that's something that's talked about in this issue, that Leah Williams and Lucas Wernick do a very good job of depicting the fact that this has been a harrowing event for Magneto. He didn't walk out of this unscathed. Yes, he got everything that he wanted. He got his daughter back, but he had to do terrible things to make it happen. And there's even, talk about how he used to do this when he was with the Brotherhood, that he committed great atrocities. He's done unimaginable, terrible things to people. However, he did these things because he loved the people who he fought for, and he's always kind of been a freedom fighter style character, but that doesn't mean when he's going around back in the day, like, back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, where he's flying around in his magnetic bubble and just raining down death and destruction and just declaring the extermination of the human species. That wasn't something that he did willy-nilly. He did it because he wanted to protect his people. That doesn't mean that he didn't feel something in regards to that. The things that he's done have weighed on him, and the fact that he got his daughter back. She's now a part of his family. She's now accepted on Krakoa, but at what cost? He's had to sentence someone who he also considers family to him, and I'm talking about Toad, someone who has been an ally to him, even though he mistreated him pretty terribly, during the course of their time working together. But over the years, he has grown to see him as family, and he has had to damn someone else just to exonerate another. He had to orchestrate her murder, and even though he knew that murder and death was just a minor inconvenience for her, that doesn't change the fact that it had to be done. That's something I've been talking about since House of X began, when people said that, oh, because the mutants have resurrection protocols, that means death is meaningless. No, you still have to go through the aspect of dying. That doesn't go away. You had to experience it, and you also lose something from it. We learned that with Way of X. We learned that mutants losing time due to their deaths, like losing those gaps in their memory, was how Onslaught was able to come back. And right now, we're looking at a broken man. He literally just had to do probably one of the hardest things that he's ever done. What we witness in this issue is Magneto finally showing what really happens behind closed doors after he's done something that he's not comfortable with, or something that he feels he has to justify to himself that he was right to do. I also think this is going to also lead into what we know is going to be the Immortal X-Men series, which recently in the solicits reveals that Magneto is leaving the Quiet Council, and they don't really say why, but I think that if we look at the events of Trial of Magneto, it might be safe to say we already know the answer to that question. But anyways, that's basically everything that you kind of need to know about X-Men Trial of Magneto. This was a really interesting, very cool little story. I do feel like, and I've seen some people talk about this online, that maybe this should have been an issue or two shorter. I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment. I do think that it told the story it needed to tell, and it wasn't overlong, and it didn't waste any of my time. I feel like it actually did a pretty good job of handling its business. Now, I will say, if they would have treated this as an event much in the way of, say, I don't know, Ten of Swords, where I kind of felt like that one was a bit overlong. I kind of feel like, yeah, the Ten of Swords style where we got like 20 parts, 21 some odd parts to a story, that is a bit egregious. I'm actually kind of digging what they've done with these X-Men stories, these bigger stories like with House of X. Now, House of X is a bit longer because you're literally looking at about a 12-issue story. However, we got Inferno as well. It is a shorter story. It's only 4 issues. This was only 5. At least for these little micro events, sticking around 4 to 5 issues, I think is perfect. I don't think any story should go longer than 12 issues, at least as far as stuff like this is concerned. So I'm glad it didn't overstay its welcome. Because there were even, and as much as I love House of X and Powers of 10, I do love that story, but I do feel like in some parts, yeah, they could have lost about 4 or 5 issues of that story, and I think it would have been better for it. But everything served a purpose in the end, so it all worked out. That said, yes, I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it a lot, and honestly, I can't wait for this to come out in trade. I want this story in hardback to put up on my shelf. But yeah, anyways, if you enjoyed this video, Hulk smash that like button and make sure to share it all over the internet with all your friends, so that way they'll know how you leveled up your comic book big brain in regards to X-Men and the Trial of Magneto. On your way out, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know what you thought about X-Men Trial of Magneto number 5 and the story as a whole. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.